monstering barnacles. It's the Bigger Boat podcast.
Captain Haddock, so glad you could join us.
How was that? Was that
it's quite
okay?
good.
Was that all right?
Yeah.
I was really worried about that.
Was that 20 hours worth of rehearsal?
Of the Scottish accent practice, yeah, just in the mirror. We're the movie podcast where we go through Steven Spielberg's entire back catalogue, one film at a time. I'm Luke, and as always, I'm joined by the man who does all the hard work on this podcast. So very much the Snowy to my Tintin. It's my pet Joey.
Woof.
How are you, mate?
I'm good, thank you, yeah. Just got back from Italy.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. How was that?
It was very good. I went to have a little look at Pompeii.
Yeah.
I always have to resist saying Pompey, because it's very close to Portsmouth.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is just down the road from where I live.
And it looks like Portsmouth has been the subject of a natural disaster as well, but no, that's just it. That's just Fratton.
That was Luke that said that, not me.
How was Pompeii anyway? How was Italy?
Yeah, really good. Yeah. So stayed in Naples, which is a really interesting city, actually.
Yeah.
Absolutely crazy drivers.
Yeah.
You take your life into your hands every time you try to cross a road.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
as long as you sort of like don't ever have to cross roads, you can have a brilliant time.
It's one of those like when I visited it was one of those interesting cities. I think I told you this before, where like I think the mafia run a lot of the governmental services.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. I don't think that's a controversial opinion. But like a lot there's like rubbish piled high in the streets because it just never gets collected at all.
Yeah.
So it has a bit of a fruity aroma to it.
Yeah. And
then it adds to the charm.
I mentioned to you before we were recording that, I did see about 4 people rummaging through them on the first day. Is this just done? Like, oh well.
Just backpackers.
Yeah.
So, apart from going to Italy, have you seen a film in the last...
I have. I watched the film yesterday, actually.
Okay.
I was showing someone one of my all-time favourite movies.
Yes. Okay. This is a responsibility if you're showing someone for the first time, like, this film represents me and what I love.
Yeah.
And are you looking at the other person in time going, do you like it? Do you like it?
Yes.
What film did you choose? Please say it's really embarrassing.
No, it was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Okay. That is a very you film, actually.
Yes.
That is probably the one film it's probably the one thing I would associate you the most with, to be honest.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Because you're insane. Okay, and what was the other person's opinion of it?
So I said, did you enjoy that? Did you? Because I think it's one of the best movies ever.
Yeah.
It honestly is like my definitely top 5, almost pushing number 1.
Yeah.
Well, this person said they didn't particularly warm to the Jack Nicholson character.
Okay.
And that Nurse Ratched was just doing her job, just doing it very well. And I thought, well. It's like
one of the greatest movie villains of all time.
I was like, that's an interesting point of view. Considering, let me ask you as a medic.
Can you not show this person Schindler's List, by the way?
I would say she didn't do her job particularly well. I think she broke some quite serious ethical codes. Because remember, spoiler alert, what makes Billy Bibbit sort of commit suicide is the fact that she crosses the ethical line by knowing him as a patient and saying, what worries me is how your mother's going to take this when he sleeps with Candy, the floozy.
Yeah.
That she's crossed the boundary and that's what leads to his suicide.
Yes.
So that's not doing a job well.
No. What was the question from a medical perspective?
That shouldn't be done, right?
No, you shouldn't encourage your patients to commit suicide. No, that's...
I know she's a nurse and she's not technically... Because she's like a ward nurse and she's not an out-and-out therapist or psychoanalyst.
Yeah.
And it's not solely her job to sort of like completely psychoanalyze these people, but it just feels like she's knowingly crossed the line there.
I think it's difficult, a historical representation of bad medicine, back in the days, because these places were full of people who ranging from people who were genuinely psychotic to people who were just a bit depressed.
Yes.
And the treatment for a lot of them was the same, and things like electroconvulsive therapy seems completely... although it's still used, it's still used, but only in sort of extreme cases.
Yeah.
And I am not a psychiatrist, and I don't know anything about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But when you had that sort of... when mental health illness was understood in much less sympathetic terms than it is these days, then... you can make anyone out to be a monster. And, what Nurse Ratched does is monstrous in that film.
Yes.
And I'm sure that there are stories of real psychiatric nurses who are probably quite similar to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was who wrote the book? One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Ken Kesey.
Ken Kesey, that's it. What did he have experience at all of being in a psychiatric placement at all, or
not for his mental health.
no?
He worked as a porter.
Did he?
Yeah,
Okay.
In a mental health hospital.
Ah, okay.
Yes. And then he took part in the first LSD tests.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, as a sort of drug trial.
Yeah.
But grew to he actually loved the experience. Like, he obviously had really, genuinely,
Yeah, fair enough.
he had really good trips, I think.
Yeah.
And so, basically what you think of as a 60s hippie was more or less created by him and members of the Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
Well, basically what they did was got a massive old school bus and painted it all the psychedelic colours because that's what they were seeing, because no one had tried it before this.
Yeah.
So this was probably 1959 or something.
Yeah,
so
sure.
just pushing it into, which became sort of decade defining.
Yeah.
It's called the something or other acid tests and stuff. There's a couple of documentaries about it.
Okay.
There's I think Jack Nicholson is in a movie called The Trip, which is about that as well. Like a low budget 70s movie, and it is about taking LSD.
Yeah.
Interesting time, I think. It makes some interesting work, anyway.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I think. So, how about you? Have you watched a film this week?
I did. I watched Green Book.
Right, the Oscar-nominated,
Oscar-winning best film this year. Yeah, which is, if you don't know or you haven't seen it yet, it's sort of the story set in like the 1950s, I think it is. You got Viggo Mortensen, who's this Italian-American bouncer. Also does some driving, needs a job. He's a bit of a racist as well. And the job he gets is driving around a black concert pianist around the not as progressive south of America, where he expects to run into a lot of potential violence. Viggo Mortensen's character is meant to drive him around and protect him.
Yeah.
They're quite distinctive personalities. And I think Green Book's come under a bit of flack because, I mean, it's quite clearly not the best film of last year.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone who's commented on it agrees it was the best film of last year.
Yeah.
But the way Oscar voting works, I think you have to rank them all.
Right.
So if for like the 7 Best Picture nominees, you rank them all from 1 to 7.
Right.
Which means that something that is ranked number 2 or 3 for most people, but everyone likes to a degree, can potentially be nominated Best Film.
Right.
Because some people might hate something that people love.
So it's a bit like counting the presidential votes. Hillary actually won, but then
potentially, yeah, exactly.
And Trump gets in anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly like that. And it's come under a bit of criticism because essentially of the way it plays race, how it's a white man's redemption story.
Right.
And essentially, I think it can be best summed by Simon Mayo and on the Mark Commode on their podcast.
Yeah.
Simon Mayo essentially said, it's driving Miss Daisy, except the racist is in the front. and that sort of perfectly summarises it. And watching it, the thing that reminded me the most of it is, that Flight of the Conchords song, I'll Be the Racist Dragon?
Yes.
And there's a bit in the song where they're telling the story of I'll Be the Racist Dragon, where it goes, and suddenly Albie wasn't racist anymore.
Yeah.
You can almost hear Brett from Flight of the Conchords say that line in the car, and suddenly Viggo Mortensen wasn't racist anymore.
Yeah.
And then everyone's super happy.
Yeah.
Very good performances. Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala Ali are very, very good in it, and that elevates the film definitely. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good film. It was not the best film of last year, but it was a good film.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did like it.
All right, I will check that out.
Yeah. But also in news this week, so you posted this on our Twitter page, the fact that Sidney Sheinberg passed away, unfortunately, this week.
Yes.
Do you want to explain to the listener who Sidney Sheinberg was? Or
So he is the former president of Universal Studios, right sort of bang in the middle of the start of Steven Spielberg's career.
Yeah. And he's sort of the person who is said to have found Steven Spielberg.
And nurtured his talent.
Yes, absolutely.
Because Steven Spielberg, he had directed things before he joined Universal, television shows, etc., including an episode of something or other with Joan Crawford, which I imagine, when he was 24, which I imagine was pretty intimidating. She's quite a
force to be reckoned with.
Quite a diva, yeah.
Yes.
So I imagine that was quite a good grounding. But yes, Sidney Sheinberg, who really elevated him into movies.
And I think he was the one, because, we talked in our Jaws episode of Jaws going over long and over budget.
Yes.
It was Scheinberg who stuck with him and said, no, this guy's something.
Yes.
Stay with it.
So he deserves a real pat on the back.
Absolutely.
For recognising talent, I think that's a real skill in itself, isn't it? Recognising the potential in someone.
I think he was quite a traditionalist, though, and he had quite strong views. Did you hear the fact that he was insistent that Back to the Future had its name changed to Spacemen from Pluto instead?
What? Is that the name of the comic?
That is the name of the comic.
Right, there you go.
But that's... I think they must have put that in... I don't know if they put that in afterwards, because Steven Spielberg then sent him back a message saying, "We really enjoyed your memo. It made us all laugh out loud." But he was quite insistent, saying it's a bit of fun, Spacemen from Pluto. It's
but it's also one tiny moment which most people won't even remember.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
From Back to the Future.
No idea. Yeah.
Oh well.
And he got on. There was a lot of infamy. Terry Gilliam makes an appearance on this podcast quite a bit, but Sid Sheinberg famously hated Brazil.
Oh really?
And because Brazil got released as Terry Gilliam's, the cut that he intended to make in Europe. But then when it went over, it had a different distributor. I think it was Universal that was distributing it in America, and he just hated the film. And there's something in the contract that means they had the right to recut the film.
Right. Yes.
So they were going to recut it to make it more like a traditional sci-fi-ish love story, rather than so. But they felt they had enough elements there that they could edit the story that they would tell a completely different story with the footage that they got. And apparently they did recut it, and Gilliam absolutely, obviously,
I can imagine,
hated it. Brazil was his baby.
Yeah.
He put out an advert in, I think it was either Variety magazine or something like that, saying, "Sidney Sheinberg, why will you not release my movie, Terry Gilliam?" And they were even petitions that they were going to bus people over to Mexico to watch the film in its true state, and then bus people back, because it wasn't being shown in America. And from all that flack, eventually they released. Oh yeah, and also interestingly because of that, so they ended up showing it to some LA film critics or something like that. So before it even been released, the film critics had already seen it and nominated it for Best Director, Best Picture.
Oh really?
Best Original Screenplay, all that, just to sort of force Universal's and Scheinberg's hand to release it.
Oh really?
In the full unedited glory.
I see.
Well, the masterpiece that is Brazil. It's an important film, and it's
definitely got Gilliam's hand all over it.
Absolutely,
so to have that tampered with, it would make sense. You'll end up with a sort of Frankenstein's monster of a movie. Yeah. Maybe that's why, because we've mentioned before that Terry Gilliam has been critical of Spielberg and the way he answers every question that is ever set up in his movies. Wonder if this all is a deep-rooted...
Again, because Spielberg is Scheinberg's man, isn't he?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah. And
Scheinberg's protege.
Exactly, yeah. And Scheinberg was very much an advocate for more simplistic, classical storytelling, which Spielberg traditionally fits in. He's quite a traditionalist in that respect, isn't he?
So, maybe while we're talking about this, because we've talked about it quite a bit on Twitter, but not actually face-to-face, and we sort of said we would, should we just mention a little bit about some of Spielberg's comments recently regarding Netflix? Yeah. So Spielberg's been quite critical, and we have, having listened back to some of our previous episodes, we have Spielberg hasn't really hidden this, because we have loosely mentioned it. He really doesn't like sort of streaming services and things.
I'm not sure that's fair. I think he's made some comments, hasn't he, about what should categorize what should be Oscar worthy.
Yes.
And not in terms of filmmaking, but in terms of distribution and how it's the medium in which a film is viewed.
Yes.
Rather than he's not criticizing the competency of filmmakers at all.
No. It's more about how it comes to the audience.
Yeah. And there were some comments after the Oscars about what a film needs to go through in order to be eligible to be nominated for some of the major awards. So at the moment, I think a film needs to be in a certain amount of theatres for a certain amount of time in order to be eligible.
Yeah. It needs to be a certain budget too, I know.
Yeah. And for example, the big one this year was Alfonso Cuarón's Roma, which was distributed by Netflix and won Best Foreign Film and Best Director. Because that Netflix put a lot of money behind this as making it an Oscar contender, and then putting up, it did get a short cinematic release. And the people who saw it at the cinema say, yes, this is the way you need to be watching Roma. It's a very cinematic film.
Yeah, and having watched it, it is.
It is cinematic, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it would add something watching it in a cinema.
Yeah, because it's a very wide shot kind of a movie.
Absolutely.
You get very few close-ups, and there's like a whole revolt happening through a window, and it makes you sit forward because it feels like you're missing parts of the action because every person is so tiny and that far away.
And I think the media has jumped on this and then said, Spielberg is being an elitist, he's being too old school, this is where things are moving forward.
Because he's insisting that in order to be Oscar worthy to get a nominee, it should be a theatrical release.
Yes, yeah. And Netflix have come back and Netflix have come back and not addressed Spielberg directly, but said, we on a tweet, we love cinema, here are some things we also love. Number 1, access for people who can't always afford or live in towns without theatres. Number 2, letting everyone everywhere enjoy releases at the same time. And 3, giving filmmakers more ways to share their art. And these things are not mutually exclusive. I mean, what's your take on the whole thing?
Yes, they are some positives, but you have also omitted some of the negatives and things. I think
the thing is, everyone's got a point. Netflix,
everyone's got a point.
Spielberg's got a point, and there's going to be some way. They're not at odds with each other.
Yeah.
You can have. I'm sure there's a way of getting some of the streaming services more theatrical releases for the ones they want to consider, for the films that they feel will be more cinematic, or for the films that they think could be in awards contention.
Yes,
there's got to be a way to compromise between the two.
Yeah,
and I think all Spielberg is doing is he wants to preserve the magic of cinema, which is a magical experience. Going into a theatre in the dark and experiencing something with a group of strangers,
experiencing something which is bigger than you, isn't it?
Is the way I like to watch films. I know I watch a lot of Netflix as well, but that will always be the gold standard for me. And I appreciate it. And Netflix has done, and other streaming services, Amazon Prime, things like that, they're doing a great job in creating content and giving opportunities to filmmakers and to actually try and break through that glass ceiling and get films and stories made, which may lead on to other things, but the two aren't mutually exclusive.
It does. It's also interesting, having looked up Annihilation, which was one of your favourite films. Basically what it was made for and the amount of money it is quoted as having made in the box office is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think it cost I don't know, I can't remember, but it's something let's say it cost 140 million to make.
Sure, okay.
It was then sold to the distribution company, which is Netflix, as 140 million. So there's been no profit made. It's just they've just named their price at the point where they've made it.
Yes.
So if they've made any money, it's up front and not through residual receipts. So there's no money coming back to the filmmakers if they actually happen to make a hit, because I just don't understand how you could actually make money through Netflix, personally. But
but they must do.
They must do, unless eventually the barrel's going to run dry and they're I don't
know, but they're making more and more and more content.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Would it imply that they are making money?
Yeah, I don't know the model.
No, I don't know the model.
But we'd be interested to hear your take on this as well. So get in touch with us if you have a strong opinion on it. I know there are a lot of people who have had a strong opinion on it.
We'll continue to post updates when we hear them on Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. But for me, I think the media has just jumped on this and said, these two parties have separate opinions, where they're just making two different points on the same scenario, and those two things don't have to be at odds with each other.
It feels like Spielberg is using award ceremonies to make his point, that basically that filmmakers should aim for a theatrical release. So he's saying he, as far as I'm aware, thinks Roma should be nominated for an Emmy, which is television.
Yes.
Awards, and it's not worthy of an Oscar, which is film.
Worthy might be the wrong word for it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people would argue that is a much better film than Green Book. And I think it's difficult also, the fact that this point was made by Steven Spielberg, of all things. The face of Hollywood.
Yeah.
The face of,
he's also
studio Hollywood.
I think he's the president of the Oscar Oscar board as well.
Sure.
Yeah. So it's almost he's probably got deciding vote.
It's true. When's the last time Spielberg made an independent movie? Yeah. We haven't mentioned the fact... I did in the intro, but So today we're talking about The Adventures of Tintin, though.
Yes, we are.
Am I right in saying you haven't seen this?
That's right, yeah, I haven't seen it, yeah. I remember when we recorded with Liam, he said, it's like the best Indiana Jones movie, which just doesn't happen to feature Indiana Jones. So I'm interested to see if that lives up to that.
Because I remember, I've seen this once, and I remember not liking it.
Really?
Yeah. I don't think I watched it at the cinema. I think I must have watched it at home on DVD. I really can't remember much about what happens, but I remember not liking it.
Yeah.
Which is odd because there's a lot of people that I really like involved with the making of it. Obviously, Steven Spielberg, the writers Stephen Moffat, Edgar Wright, and Joe Cornish.
Yeah.
Three of people who have, in separate ways,
great talents,
have been very, very important in my sort of my cultural upbringing.
Yeah. And Steven Spielberg, and it's very Spielbergian material because. Indiana Jones, the pace of Indiana Jones feels like it's sort of borrowed from.
It's interestingly said, because when Liam said Indiana Jones, I'd be interested to see it again because I hadn't even made that connection between the fact that this could be Indiana Jonesy.
Oh, really?
No.
I have. So,
well done, you.
I have. We've seen a lot of the cartoon, The Adventures of Tintin, haven't we? Because our old housemate Jesse, Luke and I basically had enough DVDs that we could sort of almost like rent them out like a video shop.
Yeah.
But Taxman we never did, honestly. But Jesse's only contribution was the box set of
the animated Adventures of Tintin episodes. Yeah.
So we have seen pretty much all of them.
And I read I had a lot of the Tintin books growing up as well.
Yeah. But don't you think the whole premise of him sort of being, finding clues and that leads to one thing, and he's very much about a secret doorway, he says all the time.
Yeah, he does say a secret doorway.
He says it way too much.
Yeah, every single puzzle.
Like a brush against a tree while he thinks, a secret doorway.
Great snakes! It's a secret door. Yeah, I guess so. I guess the fact that Tintin himself as a character is sort of a nothing, is sort of a nothing character.
Yeah, he's quite bland.
He's very bland, and that was how he was written. And that's not a criticism of Tintin itself, but it's just he's quite bland. But he has other larger than life characters all the way around him, and that's how he interacts with them. Because of that, and because I think Indiana Jones as a character himself is so and his personality is so integral to an Indiana Jones movie, that I just didn't really make that connection. But you're absolutely right. He's solving puzzles. He's often looking at artifacts.
He travels all over the world.
I remember he goes to space, doesn't he? He goes to the moon.
Yes, yeah. Different cultures, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
A slight way to learn about different cultures.
Yeah. No, I guess you're right.
Yeah.
So I will be looking at it with those eyes when we watch it again.
It was also a massive influence on Hone and things of Wallace and Gromit as well. Sort of like, I know Wallace doesn't really solve mysteries, but the whole dog companion.
Yes.
Very Gromit-ish with Snowy.
Yeah. And also, it's like that's quite a common trope. Maybe it's from Tintin, the fact that often the dog is the more intelligent one.
Yes.
Or the fact that the dog will be finding clues,
and
the protagonist will be assuming it's them that did it, but actually it was always the dog. Gromit, or I'm thinking,
or even like Lassie. What's that Lassie? a boy down the mine shaft.
Exactly. I was thinking of Inspector Gadget.
Yeah.
But I think Tintin's meant to be a bit more useful than those characters.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, no, so I'm actually quite interested. And also, so it's probably worth, if you haven't seen Tintin, Steven Spielberg's first animated movie. So it was done motion capture, performances, and then animated afterwards.
Yeah. With thanks to Peter Jackson, who had developed that technology for King Kong and Lord of the Rings.
So sort of Gollum technology. Yeah. And so Peter Jackson was very heavily involved in this as well, actually.
Also featuring basically Mr. Motion Capture, which is Andy Serkis.
Yeah.
Andy Serkis is the guy who plays Gollum.
Yeah.
He's the guy, whenever you've seen any of those clips of behind the scenes of any of those movies, the guy with the dots on his face.
Exactly.
And they're trackers, so they track his expression. That gets fed into a computer, and then they animate based on where those dots move.
Yes, yeah. You only recognise him if he's got ping pong balls on his face.
Exactly. Yeah. Hey, draw them on. Andy, it's you.
Should we go watch it?
Yes, let's go watch it before we give away too much.
Yes. Okay. Cool. Right. If you want to watch it with us, it's not available that I can see on any of the major streaming services, but you can rent it quite easily. So do that. Watch along with us, and we'll let you know what we think shortly.
Bye.
Bye.
Snowy, look at this. A unicorn. That's a very unique specimen, that is.
Right, we are back.
Great snakes, Joey.
We survived.
A secret door. They didn't say a secret door in that entire film, did they?
No, they didn't.
No. They're missing a trick.
They are.
It's such a specific reference that no one else will get. But
Have
never
you
mind.
watched the animated series, which is on Netflix?
Is it?
Yeah, you'll know what we're talking about.
Fine. Fair enough. So that was your first time. What did you think?
It's good. It's very fast-paced, and it does make me think of Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
But you're right, because it's not Indiana Jones, it's just not as funny, is it, to start off with? He's just a more serious character.
Yes.
There are jokes in it, and it is quite funny.
Yeah.
But it's just missing that extra little thing which Indiana Jones has, which is...
And do you think
he himself is just an interesting character?
Do you think that's but that's how else would they do that? I think they're trying to be true to the cartoon strip.
Yeah.
And, back in the day.
Yeah, which is a slightly more serious tone than Indiana Jones.
Absolutely. And if they changed that and he suddenly became a sort of a wisecracking,
cynical
reporter, exactly.
Yeah.
Just trying to do one last job.
Yeah.
Before I turn 16.
Yeah.
I think it would have felt very different.
Yeah.
And also, I think it would have been quite easy to do as well. Because if you look at the people who wrote the script, Stephen Moffat, like I've said before, Stephen Moffat, Edgar Wright, Joe Cornish, all either comedians or a very strong history in writing comedy.
Yeah.
Stephen Moffat wrote one of the best British sitcoms in the last 20 years in Coupling.
Yeah.
Edgar Wright has written a lot of funny movies.
He's a cynical Scot, isn't he? In
Exactly,
real life,
yeah.
Moffat. He's very like, oh yeah, whatever.
Exactly, just like that. And Edgar Wright, obviously, very funny filmmaker, made Spaced, and Joe Cornish, is half of Adam and Joe.
Yeah. And they're all very English with a very English sense of humour.
Exactly.
Sorry, Moffat's going to kill me for saying English.
Keep that in. It's like, how dare you?
Sorry, I meant they're all very British. All very British.
With a British sense of humour.
Sorry, Mr. Moffat.
I think it would have been very easy to make the script, funny or have a more cynical take on Tintin.
Yes.
But they've made a conscious decision to keep that character bland.
Yes.
And have the humorous moments happen around him.
Yeah, the silly things that the other characters do.
But,
set the boat on fire. Everyone.
Yeah, that was stupid. I will talk about that in a second.
We will. Yeah.
I've done a complete about turn of this. I've really enjoyed it.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know what I was thinking beforehand.
Yeah.
I thought this was great. I really liked it.
Because did you look at any sort of reviews of it or anything before?
Not before. No.
Because remember we said before, how we talked about when we're talking about a film that becomes a classic.
Yeah.
And can something be an instant classic?
Yes.
That's in your recent memory, because it takes a bit of time to realise, sort of gauge what the general zeitgeist of the public is about it. Having not really seen it, and it seemed to sort of come and go a little bit at the cinema. I do remember it being out. It was out in 2011.
Yeah.
But it sort of got lost in, because there's some other great movies of 2011. It had Drive and Black Swan. It's not one that instantly sort of springs to mind, is it, being part of that great year sort of thing. So I did look up, saw the odd review, and it was saying things like on IMDb it's 7.3 out of 10.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's a really high rating, you know. So it must actually be quite good, even though it sort of has been lost a little bit of people remembering that they made that movie.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised. It zips along.
It has faded into obscurity a little bit, hasn't it?
It has,
yeah.
hasn't it?
You know what I did like? I did read one review beforehand. It was a guy from The Guardian, and it was from The Guardian, and he said basically, "Oh, this movie's ruined my childhood." It was one of those reviews, all my memory. Those reviews really, really annoy me. It didn't ruin your childhood. Your childhood has already happened.
Yes.
Get over it.
Yes.
It's just a movie.
Yeah, this either reminded you of it, of your childhood, or it didn't.
Oh, it wasn't exactly how I had it in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised by it. And I think it's remarkable how...
It's kind of timeless, actually. Well, that's not true.
Timeless. Interesting.
It's not timeless.
No, timeless.
Because of the special effects.
Yes, yeah, that's true. That will date it slightly. I must have watched this, because I didn't watch it when it came out, which would have been late 2011, so I must have watched this about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
6.5 years ago. And it's amazing how my opinion has completely changed on the movie in just that short space of time.
Can you think why?
No, because I really don't remember watching it I don't remember much of my experience of watching it beforehand. Just a general feeling of dissatisfaction.
Right.
But I honestly can't pinpoint what it was.
Knowing that it was, it's a couple of the comics put together to make one feature-length movie. I was interested to know whether, because the criticism we've had of Spielberg before is it can be disjointed. Some of his movies can feel very much, even Jaws. Remember we said was quite two halves of a movie.
Very much so, yeah.
In the town and then out on the boat.
Yeah.
Much bigger extent. AI, sort of 4 separate stories almost.
Yes, yeah.
But this actually held together pretty well. I think.
It does, yeah. So
you're still having stories about the subplot of trying to catch the pickpocket thief coming up quite late into the movie. It's not just a first 10 minutes kind of.
That's true.
Kind of thing.
He is actually integral to them finding the final. It all ties together to finding the final clue. Yeah,
it ties together well, I thought.
I think it's because, yes, it's from 3 novels, but 2 of them are a direct continuation of each other. So The Secret of the Unicorn, which is the tagline to this movie, is one of the books.
Yeah.
And then that has a sequel called Red Rackham's Treasure.
Yes.
Which it involves some of the denouement at the end in the Marlinspike Hall, with the globe, where they find the treasure. That's from the second half of the book. The stuff from Morocco is from the book which came out before that called The Crab with the Golden Claws. And I think they included that in there because that's the book where he first meets Captain Haddock.
Yes.
And they wanted to sort of merge it as one whole origin story. So they've taken that element of it and moved it to without having the main plot points of The Crab with the Golden Claws, which is a separate adventure.
Because this has had quite a long sort of gestation period, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think The Crab with the Golden Claw was a much more prevalent in the earlier drafts. This has been going.
Was it? Okay,
because the development of this movie has been going on for years.
Yes, since 1983.
And I think in the beginning, possibly because when you really start introducing characters and they meet important people in that episode.
Yeah.
That's why it was.
I can't criticise the decision to include those 3 books because I think the secret, the whole unicorn story is one of the classic Tintin stories.
Yeah.
The whole Red Rackham's Treasure, and it's cinematic. It's a MacGuffin. It's buried treasure, isn't it? It's something, and it's got pirates in it, and it's and you can introduce yourself to Captain Haddock there. I think it's completely sensible that that's the stuff they started with.
Yeah.
Makes complete sense. Shall we talk about the inception of this movie to start off with?
Sure.
And then let's go on and we can delve more into our thoughts of the movie itself.
Yeah.
So you already said that this started in the 80s. So Hergé, who is the Belgian comic writer who wrote the Tintin novels over a 40-year period, he died in 1983. And after he watched Raiders of the Lost Ark, an Indiana Jones movie, the first one, and said, that's the filmmaker that I would want to make Tintin.
Yeah, and then there's an interesting little moment coming up where while Steven Spielberg was over making Temple of Doom,
which he made in England,
exactly, he had arranged a meeting with Hergé.
Yeah,
but unfortunately he died 3 weeks before. Is that right? And then his widow knew that this was more or less, this was what was going to happen.
Yeah.
So she is the one who was responsible for selling Steven Spielberg the rights.
Yeah, to all of the Tintin novels.
Yeah.
All of them. And I think they developed a script, so I think it was Melissa Matheson, the woman who wrote E.T.
Yeah.
Harrison Ford's wife, who wrote a script. But then I don't think it quite worked out, and I'm not... Did you say that was based on The Crab with the Golden Claws?
It was based on 3 again.
The 3, okay.
Yeah, but I think largely the Crab with the Golden Claw.
Fine, okay. So...
I imagine, I'm guessing, I imagine that was Act 1.
So, but that eventually got dropped. Spielberg had other projects on. The script wasn't quite there, apparently. And then it just got dropped and forgotten about for a little bit. And then...
he let the rights lapse.
He did let the rights lapse, yeah. And then it only came more recently. Tintin he wanted to sort of revisit Tintin.
In the sort of gap between letting the rights slide and picking the interest back up again, there was other people interested. Roman Polanski was one, wasn't he?
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that wouldn't have worked, would it? It's actually quite interesting that he chose Spielberg, because from reading a little bit about this, the Americas didn't have that much exposure to Tintin, to be honest. A lot of Americans didn't know who Tintin was, obviously, because Hergé is Belgian, and more the original writing is in French and was subsequently translated. So it's much more exposed to European audiences and Australia and New Zealand to a lesser degree as well.
Yeah.
Didn't really make its way across the Atlantic.
Maybe that's why Spielberg got British writers to write the movie. Do you think?
Maybe. Well, why don't you get some Belgian writers to write? Potentially, because I guess so. You would need to have that sort of reverence, don't you, and knowledge of the source material.
Yeah.
Rather than get some American going, "Who's this Tintin guy?"
Yeah.
Yeah. He'd be better with an American accent.
Yeah. Because Peter Jackson has been a lifelong Tintin fan as well.
That's right.
But that's not surprising because it feels like New Zealand, is exposed to a lot of English.
Yeah,
sorry,
absolutely.
Well, British media
and Scottish. Yeah, absolutely. And I think Steven Spielberg was first introduced to Tintin, obviously before he met Hergé, after there was a French review of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which started comparing it to Tintin.
Yes.
And
so can we believe that Spielberg was not necessarily consciously aware of Tintin?
I don't think so. Yeah.
It's interesting to know if he wasn't, because they are quite similar.
Yeah.
But you never know. People do develop things at the same time,
True, and remember, Indiana Jones is based on sort of 30 serial heroes. That sort of
which Tintin himself might have, that might have been copied from that.
He was a 1930s serial himself in comic book form.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure he didn't have an awareness of him at all. Because it generally wasn't. It was most of his adventures were written in French, not a language generally spoken in America. And it was just one of those things that I think our generation sort of grew up with, and we had all the comics.
Yeah.
Like the Asterix and Obelix books as well.
Again, I'm not too sure, but it feels like maybe Tintin could have even sort of like gone certainly sort of in a bit of a lull for a while during sort of maybe the 80s or something, let's say. But then when like DVDs came out and stuff, all this old stuff suddenly started becoming available again. Old TV series and stuff suddenly popped up on DVD.
Sure, maybe.
Which were difficult to get on VHS.
Maybe.
Because I feel like Tintin's been around for years.
But the Tintin books sort of seem timeless, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, originally, Steven Spielberg was going to make a live-action version of this movie once he reclaimed...
And by that we mean with real actors.
Yes, once he reclaimed the rights.
Yeah.
Approached Peter Jackson, right, to try and make a computer-generated version of Snowy.
Yes, because obviously Snowy is a key role in all the Tintin books and needs to do more than a trained dog could possibly do, no matter how many Crufts trophies you've won. Yeah. So they approached Peter Jackson with his company Weta Digital in New Zealand, because they were the ones who did all the digital stuff for the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Also, they were working on Avatar at the moment when they... Yeah. Peter Jackson obviously loved Tintin, and they started having some conversations about it, and together they sort of developed the project of what it would be.
Yeah.
And because Tintin is so... Well, I want to say he's drawn in a very specific way, isn't he?
He is,
in a very sort of quite bland way. It would look a bit odd having an actual actor try to play him. I don't know if you can think of any actors who would have done who would look enough like Tintin, apart from me.
I mean, I'm sure you could find someone. Eliza's friend, Thomas
Sangster,
the little boy from Love Actually.
He was actually offered the job and then turned it down and went to Jamie Bell.
There you go.
Yeah. So Tom Sangster was the kid in Love Actually, wasn't he?
Yeah. He's in Game of Thrones at the moment as well.
Yeah. Oh, he's dead. Spoilers.
Wow, secrets don't last long with Luke.
Nope. So going back to the actual movie, The Adventures of Tintin, you mentioned that this is not a timeless... You said it could be a timeless movie, but it's actually not timeless because it's dated, potentially. And I'm assuming you're referring to the animation.
Yes. Well, they usually say how to make something timeless is to set it in the past.
Yes.
Which to some extent is true, and that is why it could be said that Star Wars would never date or Indiana Jones would never date, because they're both set in the past. Even though, like, in Star Wars, Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill have very 70s haircuts.
Yes, yeah. Space haircuts. It's always the 70s in space.
But there are aspects to this filmmaking aesthetic.
Yeah.
Which can definitely date it, I think.
Yeah.
I feel like this is almost like the far end of that motion capture period that we went through with things like Polar Express.
Yes.
Which is that Robert Zemeckis movie. It's right in the middle of that sort of uncanny valley of sort of like half human, half computer game.
I think it's a hell of a lot better than
it is a lot
Polar
better.
Express, and the one I would think Beowulf as well.
Yes,
which came out probably just before this, maybe a year or so before. I think there are moments watching the movie where you're like, it doesn't quite work, and generally that's I think animation of Tintin himself.
Yes.
Rather than anything else. Like, the stuff with Haddock, I think is really good.
Haddock does look really good, yeah.
Haddock, and who else looked like... And also the opera singer, Bianca Castafiore. I think she... that's...
Yeah.
All animated really, really well. And also the flashback scenes to the pirates with Red Rackham and Haddock's...
Maybe it's because their expressions are bigger. Because they're bigger characters.
Yeah.
They can get away with it. It's the fact that Tintin is trying to be a real human CGI person.
Yes.
That the expression that they have gone short of the mark when it comes to subtlety, I think.
Well, because Tintin himself doesn't have that much huge personality, it is quite neutral.
Yeah.
You need something larger than life to give you a flash behind the eyes, some humanity there.
Yeah.
And because he doesn't have that, he does seem quite wooden a lot of the time.
Yeah, his eyes are slightly dead
compared
to the other characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's no sparkle there.
Yeah.
And Snowy ends up being more convincing as well, But there are some moments where it looks absolutely stunning and it looks really, really good. And there's a lot of complicated set pieces here.
Yeah.
And huge, wide CG environments which they interact in and that it gets filmed around and that look incredible.
Yeah.
And it really impressed me.
It looks so incredible that at times it really makes you question, why does it have to be CGI? Why can't you get actors, even if you want to put rubber masks on them to make their noses slightly bigger or whatever, in a real location?
But I think then you'll be going for what am I thinking of? Dick Tracy. That you'll end up looking like that when you've got a comic book source material and then you've got like Al Pacino in loads of prosthetics.
Yeah.
That it's an approximation of what it doesn't feel something different about it.
Yeah. And then my thing that I've complained about before in the past, let's take for example something like, have you ever seen Speed Racer?
Oh, the Wachowskis.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
So obviously it's real people in a very...
I saw the trailer and went, nope.
Yeah. in a very false environment. And that's the criticism I had of things like Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, is that it looks like real people that are cut out.
Yes.
And then composited into a computer game because the backgrounds just... You just know that the wind that's making their hair blow just isn't there. That you can just picture there's a fan just off camera. And it's the equivalent of sort of being able to see the harness strings or something as someone falls off a building or something. It just completely breaks the danger of it because you know that person's perfectly safe.
Yeah. I think the decision to make it CGI is also because there's a lot of cartooniness inherent in the story. You know, people... There's almost bits which seem Tom and Jerry like, with henchmen slipping up. I remember there's a bit where, a guy has 3 tyres fall on him. Yeah. And he gets caught in the tyres and then falls over. That's a very Wile E. Coyote sort of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is just that slight level above of I would say, the original trilogy of Indiana Jones.
Yes,
There are aspects which are far too cartoony in Crystal Skull.
Yeah, that's true. As we've established.
Yeah.
But because there are those cartoony elements of it, and for example, that big motorcycle chase outside of Morocco, that big set piece where they're chasing the falcon with the clues.
Yeah.
That's a continuous shot the entire time. It's 2.5 minutes of going through this Moroccan motorcycle chase with interacting characters there, with a giant hotel and a tank falling down, but you couldn't film that.
Yeah. It does feel like, because for example, there's a shot in War of the Worlds where you've got Tom Cruise sort of like a people carrier car driving down the road with the kids in as a wide shot, and then it keeps coming in, and then inevitably something will pass over the lens, which then suddenly gets you inside the car, and you go in through the car windows and stuff. And if you know how that's done, that's a little distracting because to have something move in front of the camera, because audiences are so savvy, we've just clearly combined two shots
Yes.
digitally. All right, it's done very smoothly, but I know roughly what's been going on.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do that sort of thing in a very undistracting way by doing it through this medium, I think. Like, there's a big wide shot of Captain Haddock's ship, and then it just comes in through the window.
Yep.
Really breezily. You just don't even think about it. Like, so all of that's been smoothed out. So it's just like, that was satisfying to watch. You know?
Absolutely.
To go from such a big wide into a, not quite a close-up, like a medium shot. But,
Yeah.
And then as part of that, what I really liked, is I think there was some real clever storytelling. And maybe, we've mentioned this before, because we've said that Spielberg loves David Lean, and David Lean loved to do this. Some really good transitions between scenes.
Yes. So
one which really springs to mind was...
Let's see if it's the same one.
When they're in the rowing boat, before they start the fire in the middle of it.
Yeah.
They just start rowing, and then we zoom out for it to become a wide shot.
Yeah.
And then suddenly a puddle comes into frame.
Yeah.
And then by the end of that, the boat is absolutely tiny, and then a foot steps over it, and then the boat isn't there anymore, and we're into the next scene.
Yeah.
Via a puddle for the next shot.
I was just thinking of the flashback sequences where Haddock starts to remember the story the story he got told of his history.
Yeah, that really works.
And he's in the desert, and then suddenly he sees the ship coming over the sand dunes. The sand dunes turn into water, and they're on the high seas in the rain from the desert.
Which really works because it's also part of the character. Like, is this a mirage?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's part of the actual storytelling.
And that's absolutely stunning, that scene. It's really lovely.
Yeah.
I think the CGI is also, you'll probably know a little bit more about this, but it allowed Spielberg to use the specific camera techniques for the motion capture, which he's never used before.
Yeah.
So apparently, instead of like having a traditional camera, you had a small monitor, like a sort of an iPad with like a video game controller around it, and you could move this into the scene around your actors with the ping pong balls on their face. You would not be because Spielberg himself didn't have any ping pong balls on him. The cameras weren't picking him up. It was just picking up the ping pong ball actors.
Yeah.
That's the technical term. And he could move around in and out the scene, in and out the scene, in and out the location, just, getting some up-close angles without being completely not visible to the camera himself.
Yeah.
But getting some really interesting camera angles and capturing the performance.
Yeah.
Like, it allows you to do something that you never would have been able to do if you'd made a live-action short. And so the transitions, the filmmaking, the camera style will completely change, and it will we've already complimented Spielberg on his camera shots or the way he frames things.
Yeah.
And it allows him to use a completely new medium to discover something new.
Yeah. There were a few times where it really made me feel like I could see Peter Jackson's influence on it.
Interesting.
Peter Jackson really likes those flowing big shots, which are very CGI, very technically difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You know, if you watch Lord of the Rings, you have Gandalf at the top of the tower. In the first one, he catches that moth after he's gone to see Christopher Lee, who's put him up there, and he whispers his message to the moth.
Yeah.
And then rather than just coming back down one of the two towers, we follow the moth, and it's like, oh, okay, so it's all in one shot.
Yeah.
It's like, I feel like I can see that being a Peter Jackson suggestion almost.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because you you are following again that escape sequence where they're chasing the Falcon. You do follow the paper in the wind, don't you?
Yeah.
Which feels very much like that.
Yeah.
That is good. So we can appreciate the mastery behind this, but because Tintin himself, there's something lacking there. Would you agree with that? If your protagonist is lacking from, for whatever reason, do you think this film still has a heart to it at all? Because he's the centre of the story. Can you still carry a film just from your supporting characters? Does this film actually have an emotional heart to it, or is it just a technical exercise?
Out of those two camps, I would say it probably falls more into a technical exercise for me.
And that does not mean it's not enjoyable.
No. Because Indiana Jones is not an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah.
It does have moments where it makes your heart race a little bit, but it's more in terms of suspense than actual character emotion. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. You're never worried about Indiana Jones. Oh, maybe the Nazis will kill him.
Yeah.
He'll be fine. Yeah, true.
No, it's more of a technical exercise, and I feel like it's almost sort of...
Do you think it needs more emotional weight then? Because I think a lot of the emotional stuff is done by Haddock. I think Haddock's the key to the story. He's the one who goes on the emotional journey.
Yes,
isn't he?
Yeah.
He's the one who sort of finds himself.
Yeah. And Tintin doesn't really change, does he?
No, he's the same, isn't he?
I suppose in the same way Indiana Jones does. He knows a lot to begin with. He's quite smart. Mm-hmm. What I would say is what I was very aware of unlike Indiana Jones, where he can talk to his sidekick, which is usually the love interest, like Marion, and they can, whether through arguing or actually just talking, or their actions, can discuss kind of what their plans are or how their emotions are in the situation. Rather than Tintin talk about his emotion or being overwhelmed by something, he stays quiet in those moments and just goes along with it, kind of thing. Or he's too much the other way and talking at the dog,
right
at Snowy.
Right at the beginning, before he's met any of the other characters.
Yeah. Right in the apartment stuff.
Yeah.
What are you thinking, Snowy?
Yeah. I think this is a 17th century galleon. Oh, there must be some mystery behind it. It's like, stop talking to the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels too much exposition-y, doesn't it?
Yeah. It falls into that... It feels like you're telling me rather than showing me.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're telling me what I need to know.
And I think that gets a lot better on the introduction of Haddock.
Yes.
Because the exposition can be explained to him, because obviously he's a drunk and can't remember anything at all.
You can explain this stuff, you can do exposition, but it needs to be tied up with the emotion, and we just said...
Or, as we said with the Catch Me If You Can episode, you need distraction techniques.
Yes.
So you need something else going on that's completely separate to it that distracts you from the fact that you're having exposition explained to you.
But that's usually after you've already heard that piece of vital information once already.
True. Yeah,
that's usually good for the recap of that exposition, just in case you had forgot. It's a very much a sort of like, in case you're lost, this is exactly what's going on. And then, you can do a distraction thing so it doesn't feel like you're being lectured to.
Yeah. So, shall we talk about Haddock? Because he is, I think, the core of this movie.
Yes.
What did you think of him?
I thought he was quite good.
Yeah. He's quite entertaining, isn't he?
So that's Andy Serkis, right?
Yeah, Andy Serkis.
Yeah.
I think he does a really good job.
Yeah.
And he's got the funniest lines as well.
He's the right tone in terms of character to fit into that world, actually.
Yeah.
You know, if we're saying Tintin is a bit boring, and he probably is, he's actually a bit too grounded, if that's possible.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a bit like he doesn't quite belong in that cartoony world.
Yeah. I mean, Tintin does get exasperated with Haddock, which is quite, which fits, with how you would with the character like that.
Yeah.
He gets very frustrated.
Yeah.
But he's got all the funniest lines. There's a bit where he goes, my memory's not what it used to be. It's like, how did it used to be? I've forgotten. And one of my other favourite scenes is when Tintin first comes across Haddock on the boat, the Karabajan, or whatever it's called, Karabajan, the boat. When he first comes across him, and then Haddock says, "Oh, in order to get to that room, I need to get these keys," and these keys are being held by his crew, who are all asleep. And he walks in, and this is like classic. This is what I think of when I think of like someone like Stephen Moffat or Edgar Wright or Joe Cornish writing. It's like they're held by a guy who's lost his eyelids in a card game. He's a light sleeper. He's lost his eyelids. That was a hell of a card game. He's just got this guy just looking at you asleep.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
I remember when we talked about Jaws, and we talked about like relatability of characters and sort of how you build empathy, and then you build the empathy and then you go on the journey. You're absolutely right, because we all to some extent can relate to whether we have an addictive personality ourselves, or chances are most people have someone in their life who is addicted to something which is bad for them.
Yeah.
And that is what gives Haddock more emotional weight, I think, than Tintin. Tintin is pretty
unrelatable,
pretty squeaky clean and unrelatable.
Absolutely.
No one in real life is quite that clean, are they?
Well, yeah. Yes.
Whereas you can sort of identify with Haddock's temptation for the drink. And
I've just realised, because I always thought that I got called Tintin because I had a little quiff and I looked like him, but maybe it's because people thought I was awkward and unrelatable.
Yes, maybe.
just a tedious know-it-all.
always disappearing behind secret doorways. You know?
Exactly. I don't do that anymore.
Where have you gone?
Not after the court order. And actually, so when he sobers up, he actually becomes less of himself, doesn't he?
Yes.
And he sort of forgets most things when he sobers up.
Yeah.
And I think a criticism was launched at the movie because Tintin is complicit in trying to make him drunk again, in order to find out more information. You know, not the best thing for him. But that's a bit of bad medicine, because if someone's got a horrendous alcohol problem, the worst thing you can do is let them sober up, because they'll go into alcohol withdrawal, and that can be fatal.
Yes.
So Tintin was actually doing the best thing for him by keeping him boozed up.
That's me saying Tintin's completely unrelatable. And again, an aspect which maybe compares him to Indiana Jones is he's not absolutely perfect, because he does have that sense of being in over his head. Mm-hmm. That whatever's going on is much bigger than him, and he has to sort of roll with the punches. But but he also sort of just gets out of them a little bit too smugly.
Yeah, there's only one bit in the movie where he says, "Oh no, I don't know what to do. They've won." And that's after that big motorcycle chase, isn't it? It's like, they've won, the ship's gone.
That sort of harbour.
I don't know what, And all Haddock says is, you hit a wall, you push through.
Yeah.
And then that seems to be enough for just that little bit of fortune cookie advice seems to be enough for Tintin to get his mojo back again.
Yeah. So on my piece of paper, I always have a little section which says themes. I was interested to know if there's going to be any daddy issues, but I didn't really see any in there. But because I mentioned before that it's very common to have your main theme sort of I think can just be an emotional sort of realization even, can't it? That seemed to be the sort of theme emotionally of the story, wasn't it? That Haddock suddenly sort of becomes a mentor, if you like, to Tintin in that moment, which is
in the accent. Come on, Joey.
Plenty of other people to call you a failure. Don't say it about yourself.
You know what? That started off really badly, but that got better at the end. Stephen Moffat will be proud.
You can fight through it. Never let it defeat you.
I'm just closing my eyes. I'm imagining I'm in a Glasgow pub.
You hit a wall, you punch through it. How was that?
That was not bad. It started off incredibly poorly, but it got a lot better. No, it's not bad. But so you said there's no real daddy issues, but I think Haddock is a flawed father figure.
Yes.
And also, there's a second father issue in the fact that you could say that Haddock is trying to reconcile his relationship with his ancestors or father, great-great-grandfather,
yes, that's right,
as well, to try and live up to the Haddock name. The Haddock name was he was a feared sailor on the Seven Seas,
yes,
huge success, and he's now a washed-up drunk. He's trying to redeem himself and redeem the family name. So I think
there's generational things there.
Exactly, yeah. You can definitely find daddy issues in a Spielberg film, as always. What were the other sort of themes that you had down there?
Because then also, while we're talking about this, the thing which really made me think of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, actually, which of course is the Sean Connery daddy issue one of the trilogy, was setting fire in the middle of the rowing boat.
Oh yeah.
Because it's that bit where they're trying to blow the fire out. The floor's on fire.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. What did you do that for? There's bits where it just descends into the ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
I found that bit that's just wholly unbelievable, surely. I just don't believe that Haddock would have actually thought that was a good idea to burn the boat.
No. He's a sailor.
Come on.
He knows about hulls and, burning a hole through a hole would sink a ship. Come on. More than Tintin.
Yeah. But there's other things that are ridiculous, which I don't mind at all. Like the plane scene, which I really liked when they after the boat, they commandeer a seaplane that's trying to kill them, and they end up flying to Morocco.
Yeah. It
goes into a storm, it runs out of fuel, and you've got that quite funny scene with the spirit alcohol, which Haddock wants to drink. And then ends up having to fill it up with his own fumes from his breath.
Yes.
I thought that's cartoony, and I liked it. It was good. I mean, the other stuff in the burning boat, I didn't think was as believable. Is not the right word, because obviously it's just ridiculous, everything. But
it was a bit. It's a step beyond.
The other thing I found distractingly unbelievable was the impossibly trained falcon of the bad guy.
Oh, yes.
We haven't talked about the bad guy at all. I'm sure we'll talk about him in a second.
That's Daniel Craig, right?
Daniel Craig, yeah.
It takes a while. And you're like, hang on, do you recognise that voice?
Yeah.
And obviously his name's in the credit. And you're like, that's Daniel Craig.
He plays Red Rackham as well. So there's a bit where they're trying to steal, in a very good scene actually, they're trying to steal a boat from a bulletproof cage. and the end of it involves a falcon which has to be specifically trained to go to the boat, snap off a mast, pick up a specific silver thing from inside the mast, a silver scroll, and then carry it back to... No, not at all. No.
Do you remember there were those, what were they, seagulls that sort of like were trained to poo on the telescopes of submarines and things like that? No?
Is that a thing that happened?
Yeah, apparently.
Telling a seagull to shit is easier than surely telling a falcon to specifically dismantle a tall ship.
The falcons are going to go crazy on Twitter. They're going to hate you. Calling them dumber than...
I've upset the falcon community. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I also really liked it. Just back to Captain Haddock for a second. The opera singer, he goes, "It's every man for himself." Because he can't stand her voice.
Yeah.
She breaks all the glass with her high voice.
That scene, that was great.
Yeah.
Because when you're wondering how they're going to break through a bulletproof cage, having an opera singer sing such a high note that it breaks the glass, I thought it was great. I thought that's a brilliant way to do it.
I love that scene.
And the actual scene of the breaking of the glass is just wonderfully shot as well.
Yeah.
Really, really good.
There's certain things which... Yeah, the glass, they can do glass really well in CGI now.
Yeah.
And the way it breaks and things, you know, like it looks very, very real.
Yeah.
I thought the Tintin sort of, you know, there's a zip line thing, isn't there, where he's sort of like, he's on sort of like the telephone wire lines in the streets.
Oh, this is again part of that motorcycle chase, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where the motorcycle ends up turning upside down and then sliding down.
Yeah.
Upside down that zip wire, yeah.
Does it remind you slightly of the mutt scene with the monkeys in Crystal Skull? But done to a much better degree.
I found that was much more believable than that scene with the monkeys.
Yes, I agree.
I didn't actually think of that, to be honest. Because I was so swept up, because that was all one take, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas with the Indiana Jones monkey scene, although that's, you know, or you could almost argue that's just as ridiculous, it's a separate scene. There's a cut, and then you go to that, which means you have to focus all your attention on the scene. You're like, oh, that's what they're doing. They're actually doing it. They're actually getting the monkeys to swing with Mutt. And then, so because there's a specific transition to that, it makes you focus on it more. If it's a continuous scene, which it is, it's like a 2.5 minute. Like I said beforehand, a 2.5 minute continuous shot. Each ridiculous element to it can add up together, and they add up to something palatable.
Yeah.
And you're aware it's more cartoony because it's a cartoon, and that forgives a lot, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is one of those movies that, and I think we said, like, from when sort of Steven Spielberg hit the noughties, he started to get a lot more political, you know. His movies took a much more serious tone. Yeah. This film feels Spielbergian.
Yes, it does.
I'm bringing back that adjective again. You know, this is the one where it actually feels like, oh, this is a Spielbergian adventure. You can do this is a definite Steven Spielberg movie.
Spielberg bit of fun. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It goes from set piece to set piece to set piece, and I think that's one of the criticisms of it is the fact that it doesn't have as many emotional moments.
Yeah, it doesn't really stop for breath at times.
No, it doesn't.
So...
And everything is a set piece after set piece. But you know what? I didn't mind it. And also, if you want emotional moments in there, you're going to, again, bloat up the running time. And this is a Spielberg movie that has come in at 1 minute 45, which is a rarity. Like, that's like less than a handful of films of Spielberg have come in under the 2 hour mark.
Yeah.
And if you want to, you know, and that's because it is so fast paced, and that's the point of it, I think.
Yeah.
It's got a bit of emotion in it, but it's an adventure, playing up the adventure moments. Yeah. And I really liked it.
It's actually really good to see that Spielberg can still make those kind of movies, because let's face it, we were so disappointed with Crystal Skull, and
absolutely,
this is coming after that. It's nice to know he can still hit those marks and get the timings right.
Yeah.
Even if the whole thing does feel a bit too fast at times, like exactly like we're saying. But
also, like, I find it interesting that, you know, you can make such a youthful movie in your mid-60s.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? You would think that, you know, people's sensibilities would change slightly and they would be less... Because, you know, this feels like something made by someone full of life. And I know Spielberg obviously is full of life.
Yeah. That was actually one of the reviews that I read. It's like full of bounds of energy.
Yeah, exactly. As this was an Edgar Wright written movie, it was nice to see Simon Pegg and Nick Frost,
Oh yes.
the spaced team, reuniting. Because we haven't mentioned Thompson and Thompson at all, have we?
No, we haven't.
No.
No, they're quite fun.
They are quite fun in their uselessness. And I like that because they are completely useless in the comics, aren't they?
Yeah.
I do find some of those characters quite grating sometimes when people's stupidity does limit things. But I think they were used sparingly. And if there was too much of them, I think it would have...
They do stumble across doing the odd useful thing as well, getting Tintin his wallet back.
Yes,
etc.
by accident.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the whole pickpocket scene.
Yeah.
I did find quite amusing at the end.
Yeah.
Although I can see people like my dad would have hated that.
Oh, really?
He would have thought it was, complete idiots. And we mentioned Daniel Craig as well.
Yes.
As the bad guy.
Yes.
I also find it... So, I know in the original comics, Sakharine was actually a minor character. He wasn't actually a main villain.
Oh, right.
So they've written him as the descendant of Red Rackham,
Right.
and as the major villain. That subplot wasn't there in the movie. So they've clearly created something in order to be a foil for Haddock. So clearly they wanted this to be Haddock's movie.
Yeah.
I do find it interesting that Steven Spielberg's main criticism has been being too, sweet.
Yes.
That they've named the main villain Sakharine.
Yes, I made that note too.
Yeah. I did quite like that. I think that's although there is a character in the books called Sakharine, I think that's a knowing nod.
Yes.
To So, do you think this is a better Indiana Jones movie than Indiana Jones 4?
Yes.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
I do.
And I think that's the main take-home point from it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Might be worth mentioning that at the time when the contracts were signed and things, this was originally intended to be a trilogy, and that's why the movie ends the way it does.
Yes, that they're going to go in the search for Red Rackham's treasure.
Yes.
Which, in the actual books, Red Rackham's treasure was what they found in the globe.
Right.
Yeah, so that was the final scene of it.
Yes.
And I think they're still on board to make it. They still are talking about it. So, but it's going to be Peter Jackson directed.
Yeah.
Apparently. And Steven Spielberg produced, so they're going to reverse the roles. I can't remember where I read this, sorry, I can't remember what the source was. But I think it's going to be based on the Prisoners of the Sun and the Seven Crystal Balls. Do you remember those ones? Which is interesting, because I think that's the one with Professor Calculus in it.
Right.
And I think that's the introduction to Professor Calculus. The amnesiac professor that they're friends with. And it's the one where they go to South America in the Incas. And I think Indiana Jones 4, looking back at it, is essentially that, isn't it?
Yes, it's true, yeah.
And John Hurt is the Professor Calculus. Oxley is Professor Calculus.
Ah. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the famous comic books.
It is, yeah.
That and Tintin in Tibet is pretty...
And Tintin, absolutely,
yeah.
And Tintin in the Congo.
Yeah.
But we won't talk about
that. Tintin in Ibiza. Not even Tin can remember that.
Oh, he'd be the most boring person in Ibiza, wouldn't he? He'd be the person you just don't want to end up in your hostel.
I'll be in the shallow end.
Bed at 9:30. Early day tomorrow.
Yeah.
One interesting thing. Do you know how Peter Jackson and Spielberg met?
No.
Their first meeting was Steven Spielberg presenting Peter Jackson the best director Oscar for Return of the King.
Really?
Yeah, that's the first time they met.
Wow, you think they would have met before that?
No, yeah.
Mind you, Peter Jackson is famous for just digging his heels in and saying, "I'm not leaving New Zealand."
Yeah. Why would you? Yeah. Yeah, so that's the first time they met. And then they ended up chatting afterwards. And then became friends after that.
Yeah.
And in order to show off what Weta Digital, his effects company, could do with Snowy, is they made the animated dog, and they filmed a scene with Captain Haddock and the dog, but Peter Jackson playing Haddock himself. So he came out, it was in full Haddock regalia.
Oh, really?
And acted with the Haddock. I'm trying to find a clip of this online, because apparently it exists somewhere.
Oh, really? That would be brilliant.
And I want to see it. But I think Peter Jackson may have tried to bury it, because he says he's quite embarrassed by it. And I quote, looked a bit of a plonker. So I quite want to see it. I think that's all that I've got.
All right, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back next week with a film that came out in the US, I think, a week after Tintin, It got released in the same week in December, and a completely different film. It's War Horse, his World War One story about a boy and his horse.
Yes.
Which I've never seen.
Oh, really?
Never, yeah.
Interesting.
Yes. I've not even seen the play either. So
I haven't seen the play.
no, okay. So we'll be back. Remember, if you could please follow us on Twitter at Big Boat Podcast. We're also on Instagram at The Bigger Boat Podcast. If you want to email us or get in touch with us about anything that we've said, you can email us on
thebiggerboatpodcast@gmail.com.
And if you could write a review for us to try and get our profile up on iTunes or Stitcher or Castbox or whatever you use to get your podcasts, that would be really helpful. So if you could give us a 5-star, just 5 stars or a 5-star review, that would be really wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really appreciate that.
We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.